In 1997, a father and his 12-year-old son left their Phoenix home for the airport, beginning what should have been a simple 40-minute drive to catch a flight to Boston. But they never boarded that plane. They never arrived at the terminal. Their rental car vanished without a trace, and for 29 years, their disappearance remained one of Arizona's most baffling unsolved cases. Until a construction crew digging near an abandoned rest stop unearthed something that would shatter a grieving widow's carefully constructed life and reveal a nightmare hiding in plain sight. If you're fascinated by true crime mysteries and unsolved disappearances, subscribe to stay updated on cases like this one. The July heat shimmered above the asphalt as Elena Brennan stood in the driveway of their Phoenix home, watching her husband load the last suitcase into the trunk of the rented sedan. Thomas moved with his characteristic efficiency, checking and rechecking that Daniel had everything he needed for the 2-week trip to Boston. Their son, 12 years old and buzzing with excitement about visiting his grandparents and touring MIT, was already buckled into the back seat, his Discman headphones hanging around his neck. "You have the tickets?" Elena asked for the 3rd time that morning, unable to shake a vague sense of unease that had settled over her since waking. Thomas smiled, that patient, loving smile that had won her over 15 years ago. "Right here in my briefcase, along with Daniel's motion sickness medication and the contact information for your parents." He closed the trunk with a solid thunk. "We'll be fine, Elena. It's just a quick drive to Sky Harbor." Elena glanced at her watch. 9:30 in the morning. Their flight departed at noon, giving them plenty of time even with Phoenix traffic. Thomas was always cautious, always early. It was one of the things she loved about him. "Come here, you," she said, pulling Daniel out of the car for one more hug. He tolerated it with the good-natured embarrassment of a boy on the cusp of adolescence. "Be good for Grandma and Grandpa. Call me when you land." "I will, Mom," Daniel said, already pulling away, eager to begin the adventure. Thomas embraced her last, holding her close for a moment longer than usual. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "We'll see you in 2 weeks." "I love you too," she replied, memorizing the feel of him, though she didn't know why the impulse struck her so strongly. She watched them pull out of the driveway, watched Thomas's careful wave through the driver's side window, watched Daniel's hand shoot out of the back window in an enthusiastic goodbye. The rental sedan, a silver Toyota Camry, turned left onto Desert Willow Drive and disappeared from view. That was the last time Elena Brennan saw her husband and son alive. When they didn't call from Boston that evening, she assumed a delay. When the airline confirmed they'd never checked in for the flight, she called the police. When the rental company reported the car had never been returned, she began to understand that something terrible had happened on that bright July morning. 29 years later, she would finally learn the truth. The Phoenix sun blazed overhead as Elena Brennan stepped out of her air-conditioned sedan and into the parking lot of the Arizona Department of Public Safety. At 58, she moved with the careful deliberateness of someone who had learned not to hurry, not to hope too quickly. The voicemail from Detective Sarah Chen had been brief but urgent. "Mrs. Brennan, this is regarding your husband and son's case. We need you to come to the station as soon as possible. We've found something." In 29 years, Elena had received dozens of such calls. Each one had led nowhere. A possible sighting that turned out to be someone else. A tip from a psychic. A hiker who thought he'd seen a silver sedan rusting in a canyon, which turned out to be a different vehicle entirely. She had learned to armor herself against disappointment, to keep her expectations buried so deep they couldn't hurt her anymore. But something in Detective Chen's voice had been different. Not excitement, exactly. Something heavier, something that felt like dread. The detective met her in the lobby. A woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and an expression that immediately put Elena on edge. "Mrs. Brennan, thank you for coming so quickly. Please follow me." They walked through corridors Elena had traveled countless times over the years, past cubicles where investigators worked on other cases, other tragedies. Detective Chen led her to a small conference room where another officer, an older man with gray hair and weathered features, stood waiting. "This is Detective Marcus Webb," Chen said as they sat down. "He's been reviewing cold cases, and your family's disappearance came back across his desk about 6 months ago." Elena's hands tightened on her purse. "What did you find?" Detective Webb cleared his throat. "Mrs. Brennan, 3 days ago, a construction crew was excavating land near the old Desert Vista rest stop on Interstate 10, about 20 miles east of here. The rest stop was closed in 2003, and the area has been abandoned ever since. They're planning to build a new commercial development there." He paused, and Elena saw him exchange a glance with Detective Chen. "During the excavation, they uncovered a vehicle buried approximately 8 feet underground." The room seemed to tilt. Elena gripped the edge of the table. "Thomas's car?" "A silver 1997 Toyota Camry, license plate matching the rental your husband was driving," Webb confirmed. "We've spent the last 72 hours processing the scene. Mrs. Brennan, I need to prepare you. This is going to be difficult." "Are they inside?" Elena heard herself ask, her voice sounding distant and strange. "Did you find Thomas and Daniel?" Detective Chen reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of Elena's. "We found remains in the trunk of the vehicle. 2 sets. We're conducting DNA analysis now, but based on the preliminary examination, one appears to be an adult male, the other a juvenile male consistent with your son's age at the time of disappearance." Elena had imagined this moment for nearly 3 decades. She had rehearsed it in therapy, prepared herself for the day she would finally know. But nothing could have truly prepared her for the hollow, devastating certainty of it. They were dead. They had been dead all along. While she had spent years hoping, searching, never giving up, they had been buried in the desert, 8 feet underground, hidden away like garbage. "How?" she whispered. "How did they die?" The detectives exchanged another look, this one longer, more troubled. "That's where this case becomes more complex," Webb said carefully. "The medical examiner found evidence of trauma to both victims. Blunt force trauma to the skull in both cases. Mrs. Brennan, your husband and son, were murdered." The word hung in the air like poison. Murdered. Not an accident. Not a wrong turn in the desert or a medical emergency, or any of the terrible but natural explanations she had constructed over the years. Someone had killed them deliberately. Someone had buried them in the ground and let Elena suffer for 29 years, never knowing. "There's something else," Chen said quietly. "The vehicle was buried very deliberately. Someone excavated a deep hole, drove or pushed the car into it, and filled it in. This required significant time, equipment, and planning. This wasn't a random crime." "The rest stop," Elena said, her mind struggling to process the information. "They were going to the airport. Why would they stop there?" "We don't know yet," Webb admitted. "But we're going to find out. Mrs. Brennan, I want you to know that this case is now our top priority. We have forensic evidence we didn't have in 1997. We have new technology, new techniques. Whoever did this, we're going to find them." Elena sat in silence for a long moment, staring at her hands. Hands that had packed Daniel's suitcase that morning. Hands that had straightened Thomas's collar. Hands that had waved goodbye as they drove away to their deaths. "I want to see the car," she said finally. "Mrs. Brennan, I don't think that's... I want to see it," she repeated, her voice hardening. "Please." The detectives consulted silently, and then Chen nodded. "I'll take you to the impound facility. But I need to warn you, Mrs. Brennan. It's been underground for nearly 30 years. It's not going to look like you remember." 20 minutes later, Elena stood in the cavernous impound garage, staring at what remained of the silver Camry. The vehicle was caked in dried desert soil, its paint dulled and corroded. The windows were shattered, Whether from the burial process or the excavation, Elena couldn't tell. But she recognized it. Even destroyed, even transformed into this relic of horror, she recognized the car that had carried away her family. "We found personal items inside," Chen said quietly. "Your husband's briefcase in the front seat. Your son's Discman still in the back. Luggage in the trunk, along with the remains." She hesitated. There was also a map. Someone had marked a route, but it wasn't the route to the airport. "Where did it go?" Elena asked. "North," Chen replied. "Toward Flagstaff." "Mrs. Brennan, is there any reason your husband would have deviated from the planned route to the airport?" Elena shook her head slowly. "No. Thomas was always punctual. He would never risk missing a flight, especially not with Daniel excited about the trip." "Then we have to consider the possibility that they were forced off course," Webb said, "either coerced or driven by someone else." As Elena stared at the ruined vehicle, a thought occurred to her. "The rental company," she said. "When you called them in 1997, what did they say?" Chen pulled out a notebook, flipping through pages. "According to the original case file, the rental company reported the vehicle as unreturned. Your husband had rented it for 3 weeks to cover the Boston trip and a few days extra." "Who did he rent it from?" Elena pressed. "Was it someone at the agency, or did someone else handle it?" Webb's eyes sharpened with interest. "That's a good question. Let me pull the original rental agreement." He made a call, spoke briefly to someone, and then looked up with a strange expression. "Mrs. Brennan, the rental was arranged through a third-party service, a company called Desert Roads Auto Rental. According to our records, they went out of business in 1999. 2 years after Thomas and Daniel disappeared," Elena said slowly. "We'll start there," Chen said. "Find out who owned that company, who worked there, who might have had access to information about your husband's travel plans." She turned to Elena. "Mrs. Brennan, I know this is overwhelming. Is there someone who can stay with you tonight? You shouldn't be alone." Elena thought of her sister Claire, who had moved to Phoenix 5 years ago to be closer to her. "I'll call my sister, but I want to be involved in this investigation. I want to know everything you discover." "We'll keep you informed," Webb promised, "every step of the way." As they walked back toward the main building, Elena felt something shift inside her. For 29 years, she had existed in a terrible limbo, unable to grieve properly because there had been no bodies, no certainty, no closure. Now she knew. Thomas and Daniel were gone, but someone had taken them from her, and that someone was still out there, had been out there all this time, walking free while she suffered. "Detective Chen," she said as they reached the parking lot. "Find who did this. Please, find them and make them answer for what they've done." Chen met her eyes, and Elena saw a fierce determination there. "We will, Mrs. Brennan. I promise you, we will." Elena drove home in a daze, the Phoenix sprawl passing by her windows in a blur of strip malls and desert landscaping. When she pulled into her driveway, she sat for a long moment in the car, unable to make herself go inside to the empty house where she had spent 29 years waiting for a phone call that would never come. Finally, she went inside and called Claire, who arrived within 20 minutes, her face pale with shock when Elena told her the news. They sat together on the couch where Elena had spent so many sleepless nights, and for the first time in nearly 3 decades, Elena allowed herself to truly weep. Not the careful, controlled tears she had permitted herself over the years, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from the very core of her being. Thomas was dead. Daniel was dead. They had been dead all along. And someone, somewhere, knew exactly how and why. Detective Sarah Chen sat in her office long after Elena Brennan had left. The case files spread across her desk like pieces of a puzzle that had waited 29 years to be solved. The photographs from the excavation site stared up at her, stark and terrible. The silver Camry emerging from the earth like a mechanical corpse. The skeletal remains carefully removed and photographed in situ before transport to the medical examiner. The personal effects, preserved by the dry desert soil, each one a small tragedy. Marcus Webb appeared in her doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. He set one on her desk without asking, a ritual they'd developed over 6 months of working cold cases together. "You look like hell," he observed. "I feel like hell," she admitted. "That woman has been waiting for answers for almost 30 years, Marcus. And what do we have? A buried car and 2 bodies. No suspects, no clear motive, and a rental company that doesn't exist anymore." Webb settled into the chair across from her desk. "We have more than we did 72 hours ago. And we have something the original investigators didn't have in 1997. "What's that?" "Time. Whoever did this has been living with this secret for 29 years. People who carry that kind of weight, they make mistakes eventually. They tell someone. They get careless. Our job is to find those mistakes." Chen pulled out the rental agreement, a photocopy from the original case file. Desert Roads Auto Rental. According to the business licensing records, it was owned by a man named Raymond Howell. He filed for bankruptcy in late 1998 and shut down operations in January 1999. "Convenient timing," Webb noted. "Did the original investigation look at him?" Chen flipped through the file. "There's a note here. Detective Ramirez, the lead investigator in 1997, interviewed Howell twice. Once, right after the disappearance, once about 3 months later. Howell claimed he didn't remember anything unusual about the rental. Said Thomas Brennan came in, filled out the paperwork, took the car, and that was the last he saw of him." "Is Howell still alive?" "I checked. He's 73 years old, living in a retirement community in Scottsdale. I think we should pay him a visit tomorrow morning." Webb nodded, then tapped the photograph of the marked map found in the car. "This bothers me. If someone forced them off the planned route, why leave a map showing where they were going?" "Maybe they didn't expect the car to ever be found," Chen suggested. 8 feet underground in an abandoned rest stop area. If not for that construction project, it might have stayed buried for another 50 years. "Or maybe the map was meant to mislead us," Webb said. "Show us heading north to Flagstaff when they actually went somewhere else entirely." Chen considered this. The medical examiner is running toxicology on what remains she can test. If Thomas or Daniel were drugged, that might tell us something about how they were controlled. Her phone buzzed with an incoming email. Chen opened it and felt her pulse quicken. Preliminary DNA results confirmed match for Thomas and Daniel Brennan. Webb let out a long breath. At least Elena will have that certainty. "There's something else," Chen said, reading further. The ME found fibers on the clothing remains. Synthetic material, possibly from rope or restraints. Both victims' hands were bound at the time of death. The implications settled over them like a weight. Thomas Brennan and his 12-year-old son had been tied up and murdered, their bodies hidden away in a makeshift grave. This hadn't been a quick act of violence. It had been planned, deliberate, cruel. "We need to rebuild the timeline," Webb said. "What do we know for certain?" Chen pulled out a legal pad and began writing. July 18, 1997. Thomas and Daniel left their home at approximately 9:30 a.m. The flight was scheduled to depart at noon. Sky Harbor Airport is roughly 40 minutes from their house in normal traffic. They had plenty of time. The rest stop where the car was found, Webb continued. How far is that from their house? About 25 minutes in the opposite direction of the airport. If they were heading to the rest stop instead of the airport, that suggests either Thomas deliberately drove there for some reason, or someone else was driving the car. The car, Chen mused. It was a rental. How did the killer know they'd be in that specific vehicle? Webb leaned forward. That's the question, isn't it? Either the killer followed them from their house, which seems risky in broad daylight, or they knew in advance what car Thomas would be driving. Which brings us back to the rental company, Chen said. Someone at Desert Roads Auto Rental could have known what vehicle was rented, when it would be picked up, where it was going. We need a list of everyone who worked there in 1997, Webb said. Employees, mechanics, anyone who had access to rental information. Chen was already typing, pulling up archived business records. I'll request employment records from the state. If Howell kept any documentation from the bankruptcy, we might get lucky." They worked in silence for the next hour, Chen making calls and sending emails while Webb reviewed the original case file page by page, looking for details that might have been missed or dismissed 29 years ago. The building grew quiet around them as other detectives went home to their families, but Chen barely noticed. She had learned early in her career that the first 72 hours after a break in a cold case were crucial. After that, the urgency faded. Other cases demanded attention, and momentum was lost. "Here's something," Webb said suddenly. In Detective Ramirez's notes from the initial investigation, he mentions that Elena Brennan told him Thomas seemed distracted the morning of the trip. Not worried, exactly, but preoccupied. Distracted how? She didn't elaborate, but what if Thomas knew something was wrong? What if someone had contacted him, threatened him, forced him to deviate from the plan? Chen reached for her phone. "I'll call Elena tomorrow, see if she remembers anything more specific about his behavior that morning." "There's also this," Webb continued, pointing to another section of the report. The rental company told police the car was picked up at 8 a.m. on July 18th, but Elena says they didn't leave the house until 9:30. Where was Thomas for that hour and a half? Chen felt a chill run down her spine. That's a significant gap. If he picked up the car at 8 and didn't leave home until 9:30, where did he go? What was he doing? "We need to check his phone records from that day," Webb said. "See who he called, who called him." "I'll request them tomorrow," Chen said, making a note. Though getting records from 1997 might be challenging. Webb stood, draining the last of his coffee. "Get some sleep, Sarah. We've got a long road ahead of us, and we need to be sharp." After he left, Chen sat alone in her office, staring at the photographs of Thomas and Daniel Brennan. The official photos from 1997 showed a handsome man in his late 30s with kind eyes and a gentle smile, his arm around a grinning boy with his father's same eyes, same smile. Father and son, caught in a moment of ordinary happiness, neither of them knowing that their time together was measured in hours. She thought of Elena Brennan, going home to an empty house, finally knowing the worst after years of terrible uncertainty. Chen had worked homicides for 15 years, had seen the damage violent death inflicted on those left behind. But there was something particularly cruel about this case, about the deliberate concealment, the years of false hope, the calculated cruelty of letting Elena wonder and search and never know. Whoever had done this had robbed her of not just her husband and son, but of 29 years of her life, 29 years of being unable to grieve properly, to find peace, to move forward. That kind of prolonged suffering required a special kind of malice. Chen gathered the files, locked them in her desk, and headed home. But sleep, when it finally came, was troubled by dreams of silver cars buried in the desert and the sound of a 12-year-old boy calling for help that would never arrive. The next morning, Chen and Webb drove to the Sunny Vista retirement community in Scottsdale. The facility was pleasant and well-maintained, with desert landscaping and walking paths winding between low stucco buildings. A receptionist directed them to Building C, Apartment 214, where Raymond Howell resided. The man who answered the door looked older than his 73 years, stooped and frail, with liver-spotted hands that trembled slightly as he held the door. His eyes were roomy but sharp, and they narrowed suspiciously when Chen and Webb showed their badges. "Mr. Howell, I'm Detective Chen. This is Detective Webb. We'd like to ask you some questions about Desert Road's auto rental." Howell's face went pale. "That was a long time ago. May we come in?" He hesitated, then stepped aside to let them enter. The apartment was small but neat, decorated with the impersonal furniture that came standard with assisted living facilities. Howell gestured to a small couch and took a chair across from them, moving slowly as if his bones hurt. "Mr. Howell, you may have seen the news," Chen began. 3 days ago, We recovered a vehicle that had been buried near an abandoned rest stop on Interstate 10, a silver Toyota Camry that was rented from your company in July 1997. Howell's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. I remember. The man and his son who disappeared. Thomas and Daniel Brennan, Webb said. You spoke with detectives in 1997 about the rental. I told them everything I knew, Howell said, his voice defensive. Which wasn't much. The man came in, rented a car, and I never saw him again. We'd like to go over that day again, Chen said gently. Sometimes details come back with time, things that didn't seem important before. Howell was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. I remember he seemed nervous, kept checking his watch, looking out the window. I figured he was just worried about missing his flight. Did anyone else interact with him? Webb asked. Other employees? Customers? I had a kid working for me then. College student, worked part-time doing paperwork and cleaning cars. Michael something. Mike Foster, that was his name. Chen and Webb exchanged a glance. Do you know what happened to Michael Foster? No idea. He quit about a month after that car went missing. Just didn't show up one day, never called, never came back for his final paycheck. I was going to report him, but then everything fell apart with the business and I had bigger problems. Did Foster have access to rental records? Chen pressed. Would he have known what car Thomas Brennan was driving, where he was going? Howell thought about it. Yeah, he did the paperwork sometimes when I was busy. He could have seen the rental agreement. How old was Foster at the time? 20, maybe 21. Phoenix kid, going to community college. Webb made notes while Chen continued. Mr. Howell, did anything unusual happen in the days before or after the Brennans disappeared? Anything that stuck with you? Howell's eyes shifted away from hers, and Chen felt her instincts sharpen. He was holding something back. Mr. Howell, she said quietly, 2 people are dead, a father and his 12-year-old son. If you know something, anything, now is the time to tell us. The old man was silent for so long that Chen thought he might refuse to answer. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. About a week before it happened, I got a phone call. Middle of the night, maybe 2 or 3 a.m., a man's voice, asking about upcoming rentals. Wanted to know if I had any cars going out for long trips that week. Chen leaned forward. Did you tell him? I hung up on him. Thought it was some kind of scam or robbery setup. But the next night, he called again. This time he said if I didn't cooperate, bad things would happen to my business. Howell's hands were shaking now. I told him to go to hell and hung up. But then the Brennans disappeared, and I wondered. Did you tell the police about these calls in 1997? Webb asked, his voice hard. Howell shook his head miserably. I was scared. My business was already struggling, and I thought if the police started investigating me, it would finish me. I convinced myself the calls weren't connected, that it was just a coincidence. Did you recognize the voice? Chen demanded. No, he didn't sound old or young, just normal. But there was something about the way he talked, real calm, like he was ordering a pizza instead of making threats. Chen stood, barely containing her anger. Mr. Howell, you withheld critical information in a double homicide investigation, information that might have saved lives or led us to a killer 29 years ago. I know, the old man whispered. I've known it for 29 years. It's why the business failed, why my wife left me, why I can't sleep at night. I've been waiting for someone to come ask me about it again, hoping I'd get a chance to finally tell the truth. Webb was on his phone, already requesting a formal statement. Chen paced the small living room, her mind racing. Someone had specifically targeted the Brennans, had called the rental company asking about long trips, had known in advance that Thomas would be traveling with his son. The calls, she said. Did they come from a blocked number? I don't know. This was 1997, before caller ID was common. I just answered the phone and there he was. And you're certain it was a man? Yes, deep voice, like I said. Calm. As Webb arranged for Howell to come to the station to give a formal statement, Chen stepped outside into the Arizona heat, pulling out her phone. She called the tech unit and requested a deep dive into Michael Foster, the college student who had quit without notice right after the Brennans vanished. Check everything, she told the analyst. Current address, employment history, criminal record, social media, everything. I want to know where he is and what he's been doing for the last 29 years. When Webb joined her outside, his expression was grim. This changes everything. This wasn't random. Someone planned this, targeted the Brennans specifically. But why? Chen said. Thomas Brennan was a civil engineer. By all accounts, he was a quiet family man with no enemies, no debts, no criminal connections. Why would someone target him and his son? That's what we need to find out, Webb said. And I think Michael Foster might have the answers. Michael Foster's last known address led Chen and Webb to a modest apartment complex in Tempe. But according to the current tenant, Foster had moved out in 2003. The property manager, a harried woman in her 50s, scrolled through ancient computer records and shook her head. No forwarding address. He left about 6 months before I started working here. I can check with the owner, but I doubt he kept records from that far back. Back in the car, Webb's phone rang. He listened for a moment, his expression darkening. Then thanked the caller and hung up. That was the tech unit. They found Michael Foster. Where? Maricopa County Jail. He's been there for the last 11 years, serving 25 to life for second-degree murder. Chen felt a jolt of electricity run through her. Who did he kill? His girlfriend. Beat her to death in 2015 during an argument. The prosecution painted him as having a history of violence, though most of his priors were assault charges, bar fights, that kind of thing. Nothing before 1997? Webb checked his notes. Clean record until 2001. Then it starts. Assault, domestic violence, escalating pattern of violent behavior. Chen pulled back onto the road, heading toward the jail. Let's find out what Michael Foster knows about July 18, 1997. The Maricopa County Jail was a sprawling complex of concrete and razor wire, baking under the relentless desert sun. Chen and Webb went through security and were led to an interview room, where they waited while guards brought Foster from his cell. The man who entered the room bore little resemblance to the 20-year-old college student he'd been in 1997. Michael Foster was now 50 years old, his face weathered and hard, his arms covered in prison tattoos. He moved with the careful awareness of someone who had learned to watch for threats from every direction. When he saw the detectives, something flickered in his eyes. Fear, Chen thought. Or maybe recognition. Michael Foster, Chen said as he sat down across from them, his hands cuffed in front of him. I'm Detective Chen. This is Detective Webb. We're investigating a cold case from 1997. Foster's jaw tightened. I don't know anything about anything from 1997. You worked at Desert Road's auto rental that summer, Webb said. You quit without notice in August 1997, right after a father and son disappeared while driving one of the rental vehicles. I was a kid. I quit a summer job. So what? Chen slid a photograph across the table. Thomas and Daniel Brennan, smiling at the camera, alive and unaware of what was coming. So 3 days ago, we found their bodies. They'd been murdered and buried for 29 years, and you quit your job right after they vanished. Foster stared at the photograph, and Chen saw his throat work as he swallowed. I didn't kill anybody back then. You can check. I didn't have any record until years later. But you remember them, Chen pressed. You remember the Brennans. A long silence. Then Foster looked up, and there was something haunted in his eyes. Yeah, I remember. Tell us what you remember, Webb said quietly. Foster was quiet for so long that Chen thought he wouldn't answer. Then, finally, he started to speak, his voice low and rough. I was working the desk that morning when Brennan came in to pick up his rental. Nice guy, polite. His kid was with him. excited about some trip they were taking. I processed the paperwork, gave them the keys, and they left. That was it. Except it wasn't, Chen said, because something happened. Something that made you quit a month later without even collecting your final paycheck. Foster's hands clenched on the table. A week after they disappeared, a man came to the rental place, late afternoon near closing. He wanted to rent a car, but there was something wrong about him. The way he looked at me, like he knew something. What did he look like? Webb asked, leaning forward. Tall, maybe 6'2", dark hair, lean build. He had these eyes, these cold eyes that just looked right through you. He asked about the Brennans, said he'd heard about the disappearance on the news, wondered if the police had found anything yet. Chen felt her pulse quicken. Did you tell the police about this man? Foster shook his head. He told me not to. Said if I talked to the cops, bad things would happen. Said he knew where I lived, where my mom lived, where I went to school. I was 20 years old and scared out of my mind. So I kept my mouth shut. But you quit, Webb noted. Yeah. I couldn't stand being there anymore, knowing something was wrong, knowing I should say something but being too afraid. I thought if I just left, moved on, it would all go away. His voice cracked. But it didn't go away. It never went away. Is that why you turned violent? Chen asked. The guilt? Foster's eyes met hers, and she saw genuine pain there. Maybe. I don't know. I started drinking, got into fights. Everything just got darker and darker until I couldn't see my way out anymore. And then I did something I can never take back. Webb pulled out a notepad. This man who came to the rental place, did he give you a name? Yeah, he said his name was David Martin. But when I looked him up later, after I'd had time to think about it, I couldn't find anyone by that name matching his description. I think it was fake. Did he rent a car? No. He looked around for a few minutes, asked his questions, then left. But before he went, he did something strange. He took one of our business cards from the counter and wrote something on the back of it. Then he put it in his pocket and left. Chen exchanged a glance with Webb. Did you see what he wrote? No, but I remember thinking it was weird, taking our card and writing on it like that. Did this man have any distinguishing features? Scars, tattoos, accent? Foster thought for a moment. He had a scar on his left hand, between his thumb and index finger. Looked like an old burn mark, like he'd grabbed something hot. Chen made a note. Did you ever see him again? No, but about 2 weeks later I got a phone call. Middle of the night. It was him. I recognized his voice. He said, "You made the right choice staying quiet. Keep it that way." Then he hung up. And you never reported any of this, Webb said, his voice hard with frustration. I was a kid, Foster said, his own voice rising. A scared kid who didn't know what to do. You think I don't regret it? You think I haven't spent the last 29 years wondering if I could have saved them if I'd just been braver? Did Raymond Howell know about this man's visit? Chen asked. Foster shook his head. He'd left early that day. It was just me closing up. That's why the guy came then, I think. He knew I'd be alone. Chen sat back, processing this new information. They now had a description of a potential suspect, albeit 29 years old. A tall man with dark hair and a distinctive scar, using the name David Martin, who had taken a threatening interest in the Brennans' disappearance. Michael, she said quietly, if we showed you photographs, do you think you could identify this man? Maybe. It's been a long time, but those eyes, I'd remember those eyes. As they prepared to leave, Foster called out to them. Detective Chen, those people, the father and son, did they suffer? Chen turned back. Yes, they did. Foster's face crumpled. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I should have said something. I should have helped. Yes, Chen said coldly. You should have. Outside, in the scorching parking lot, Webb loosened his tie and shook his head. A potential suspect from 29 years ago, using a fake name, This is going to be like finding a ghost. We have a physical description and a distinctive scar, Chen said. And we know he was familiar enough with the area to stake out the rental place, to know when Foster would be alone. This wasn't someone passing through. This was someone local, someone who knew the area well. Someone who called Howell ahead of time asking about long-distance rentals, Webb added. Someone who planned this carefully. Chen's phone rang. It was the medical examiner's office. She answered, listened for a moment, then felt her blood run cold. "What is it?" Webb asked when she hung up. The ME finished the detailed examination of Daniel Brennan's remains. "Marcus, that 12-year-old boy didn't die the same day as his father." Webb stared at her. "What?" "Based on the decomposition patterns and some preserved tissue samples, the ME estimates Daniel died at least a week, possibly 2 weeks after Thomas. Thomas Brennan was killed on or around July 18th, 1997. But Daniel Brennan was kept alive for days, maybe weeks, before he was murdered. The implications hit them both like a physical blow. Thomas had been killed quickly, but his son had been taken somewhere, held captive, kept alive for some unknown purpose before finally being murdered and buried with his father's body. "We need to tell Elena," Webb said quietly. "I know." Chen felt sick. "But first, I want to know why. Why kill the father immediately but keep the son alive? What was the purpose?" They drove back to the station in silence, each lost in their own dark thoughts. When they arrived, Chen found a message waiting from the tech unit. They'd pulled phone records from the Desert Roads auto rental for July 1997, and there were indeed 2 calls placed to the business in the early morning hours of July 11th and July 12th, exactly as Howell had described. Both calls had originated from a payphone in Phoenix, less than 2 miles from where the Brennans had lived. Chen stared at the address, her mind working. The killer had been in the Brennans' neighborhood, watching them, planning. This wasn't random. This was targeted, specific, personal. But why? What had Thomas Brennan done to attract the attention of a killer? And why take his son? She pulled up Thomas Brennan's background file, reading through it again with fresh eyes. Civil engineer. Employed by Meridian Design Group for 12 years. Married to Elena for 15 years. No criminal record, no debts, no known enemies. A quiet, ordinary life that had ended in extraordinary violence. Webb appeared in her doorway. "I've been thinking about the timeline. If Daniel was kept alive for up to 2 weeks, that means he was still alive when Elena was frantically searching for them. When she was filing missing persons reports and calling hospitals. Her son was somewhere, still breathing, still hoping someone would find him." "Stop," Chen said, unable to bear the thought. "We can't think about it that way, or we'll go crazy. We have to think about it that way," Webb insisted, "because understanding what happened to Daniel might be the key to understanding why this happened at all. The killer didn't just want Thomas dead. He wanted something from that boy. Something worth keeping him alive for days in whatever hell he was trapped in." Chen's desk phone rang. It was the front desk. "Detective Chen, there's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent. Name is Patricia Vance." "Did she say what it's about?" "She says she has information about the Brennan case. She saw it on the news." Chen and Webb exchanged glances. "Send her up." 5 minutes later, a woman in her mid-60s entered Chen's office. Patricia Vance was well-dressed and composed, but Chen could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped her purse. "Thank you for seeing me," Vance said as she sat down. "I almost didn't come. I've spent 29 years trying to forget what I saw, but when I heard they found those poor people, I knew I had to finally speak up." "What did you see, Ms. Vance?" Chen asked gently. Vance took a deep breath. "July 18th, 1997. I was driving on Interstate 10, heading east out of Phoenix. It was around 10:30 in the morning. I saw a silver car pulled over near the old Desert Vista rest stop, the one that closed down years ago. There was another car parked behind it, a dark blue sedan. I remember because I thought maybe someone was having car trouble. Chen's pulse quickened. Did you see anyone? Yes, there were two men standing by the silver car talking to the driver. At the time, I thought they were just good Samaritans helping someone. But then, as I passed, I saw something that's haunted me ever since. What was it? Vance's voice dropped to a whisper. One of the men had his hand on the back of a boy's neck. The boy was standing very still, like he was afraid to move. And the look on that child's face, the terror, I've never forgotten it. But I was already past them, and I convinced myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. I drove on and tried to forget about it. Why didn't you report it? Webb asked. I did, Vance said, her eyes welling with tears. 2 days later, when I heard about the missing father and son, I called the police. I told them what I'd seen, but the detective I spoke to said they'd already checked the rest stop and found nothing. He thanked me and said they'd look into it, but I never heard anything more. I thought maybe I'd been wrong, that it wasn't connected. Chen felt a cold fury building in her chest. Do you remember which detective you spoke to? I wrote it down. I kept the note all these years. Vance pulled a small yellowed piece of paper from her purse. Detective Lawrence Garrett. Chen took the paper, her mind racing. Lawrence Garrett had retired in 2003, but she could track him down, find out why this crucial tip had been dismissed or ignored. Ms. Vance, can you describe the men you saw? One was tall, dark-haired, thin-build. The other was shorter, stockier. I didn't get a good look at their faces. I was driving past too quickly. But the tall one, he had this way of standing, very still, very controlled. It gave me chills. The cars, Webb interjected. Can you describe them in more detail? The silver one was a sedan, pretty new-looking. The dark blue one was older, maybe from the 80s. It had a dent in the rear bumper, I remember that. Chen showed her the photograph of Thomas and Daniel Brennan. Could this have been the father and son you saw? Vance studied the photo, her hand trembling slightly. Yes, that could have been them. The boy had dark hair like that, and the man, the way he was standing in the photo, it matches my memory. After taking Vance's full statement and contact information, Chen and Webb sat in stunned silence. Someone saw them, Webb finally said. Someone saw them being abducted in broad daylight, reported it to the police, and nothing was done. We need to find Lawrence Garrett, Chen said grimly. And we need to find out why he ignored this tip. Lawrence Garrett lived in a quiet neighborhood in Mesa, in a house with a well-maintained lawn and a vintage truck in the driveway. When he answered the door, Chen saw a man in his early 70s with the kind of weathered face that spoke of too many years seeing humanity's worst. His eyes narrowed when he saw their badges. I'm retired, he said flatly. We know, Chen replied. But we need to talk to you about a case from 1997, the Brennan disappearance. Something flickered across Garrett's face, too quick for Chen to identify. Fear? Guilt? He stepped aside reluctantly and let them in. The house was neat but sparse, decorated with photographs of grandchildren and a few commendations from his years on the force. Garrett gestured to a worn couch and took a recliner across from them, his body language defensive. What about the Brennans? He asked. You were one of the lead investigators, Webb said. We're reviewing the case, and we've found some inconsistencies in how certain tips were handled. That was almost 30 years ago, Garrett said. I don't remember every detail of every case. Chen pulled out her notebook. July 20th, 1997. A woman named Patricia Vance called in a tip. She'd seen a silver car pulled over near the Desert Vista rest stop on the morning of July 18th, with two men and a boy who appeared frightened. Does that ring any bells? Garrett's jaw tightened. Vague. We got dozens of tips on that case. According to Ms. Vance, you told her you'd checked the rest stop and found nothing, Chen pressed. But according to the case file, no one actually searched that location until 3 days later. Why did you lie to her? I didn't lie, Garrett said, his voice rising. We did a preliminary check. There was nothing there. A preliminary check? Webb's voice was hard. A woman reports seeing what could have been an abduction in progress at a specific location, and you did a preliminary check. Garrett stood abruptly. You don't know what it was like back then. We were overwhelmed, understaffed. That case had media attention, tips coming in from every direction, most of them worthless. We did the best we could with what we had. Sit down, Mr. Garrett, Chen said coldly. We're not done. Garrett remained standing, his hands clenched at his sides. If you're here to blame me for not solving a 29-year-old case, you can get out of my house. We're here because 3 days ago, we found Thomas and Daniel Brennan buried at the exact location Patricia Vance told you to search. They'd been there the whole time. While you were dismissing her tip, while you were doing your preliminary check, a 12-year-old boy was being held captive somewhere, still alive, still able to be saved. And he died because nobody looked hard enough. The color drained from Garrett's face. He sank back into his chair as if his legs had given out. What? The medical examiner estimates Daniel Brennan was kept alive for 1 to 2 weeks after his father was murdered, Webb said. Which means if someone had properly investigated Vance's tip, if someone had searched that rest stop thoroughly in the first few days, we might have found him in time. Garrett looked like he might be sick. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. Why didn't you search? Chen demanded. A credible witness puts them at that exact location, and you ignored it. Why? Garrett was silent for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. Because I was told not to. The words hung in the air like smoke. Explain, Webb said. The day after Vance called, I was planning to take a team out to search the rest stop area thoroughly. But that morning, I got called into the captain's office. Captain Frank Morrison, he's been dead for 15 years now. He told me to focus my resources elsewhere, that the rest stop tip was probably nothing, that we had more promising leads to follow. And you just accepted that? Chen asked incredulously. Morrison was my superior officer, Garrett said, his voice thick with something that might have been shame. And he wasn't just suggesting it. He was ordering me to drop that line of investigation. Did he say why? No, but I'd worked under Morrison for 10 years. He was a good cop, or so I thought. If he said to focus elsewhere, I figured he had his reasons. Webb leaned forward. Did you ever ask him about it later, after the case went cold? Once, about a year later, when we still had nothing. I brought up the rest stop, suggested we should go back and search more thoroughly. Morrison shut me down hard, said I was wasting my time chasing ghosts, that the Brennans had probably left the state voluntarily. Garrett's hands were shaking now. I knew it didn't make sense, but I let it go. God help me, I let it go. Chen felt a chill run down her spine. Someone inside the department interfered with the investigation. Someone in a position of authority deliberately steered you away from the one lead that might have saved Daniel Brennan's life. Morrison was dirty? Webb asked. I don't know, Garrett said miserably. After I retired, I heard rumors. Nothing concrete, just whispers about Morrison having debts, maybe taking money from people he shouldn't have. But he died before anyone could prove anything. Who else knew about Vance's tip? Chen asked. Who else might have known you were planning to search the rest stop? The whole unit would have known. We had morning briefings where we discussed active leads. Maybe 15-20 people would have heard me mention it. Chen's mind raced. If Morrison had deliberately sabotaged the investigation, someone had gotten to him. Someone with enough money or influence to buy off a police captain, to ensure that Thomas and Daniel Brennan's bodies remained hidden. We need the names of everyone who was in those briefings, she said. Everyone who worked the case, everyone who had access to the investigation. Garrett nodded slowly. I can try to remember, but some of those people are dead now, and others scattered across the country after they retired. Try anyway, Webb said. Every name you can remember. As Garrett began writing, Chen stepped outside to make a call. She reached the tech unit and requested a full background check on Frank Morrison, deceased captain of the Phoenix Police Department. Financial records, known associates, anything that might explain why he would deliberately sabotage a murder investigation. When she returned inside, Garrett had filled 2 pages with names. Chen took the list, scanning it. Most of the names meant nothing to her, but one near the bottom made her pause. Victor Brennan, she read aloud. Same last name, relation. Garrett looked up. Thomas Brennan's older brother. He was a lawyer, came in a few times to push us on the investigation, see if we had any updates for Elena. I included him because he was around, asking questions. Chen felt something click in her mind. Did Victor Brennan have access to case details? Did he sit in on any briefings? No, not officially, but Morrison sometimes talked to him privately, gave him updates as a courtesy since he was family. Where is Victor Brennan now? Garrett frowned. I don't know. He stopped coming around after about 6 months. I assumed he moved away or just gave up hope. Back at the station, Chen pulled up everything she could find on Victor Brennan. The records painted an interesting picture. Victor had been a corporate lawyer for a large Phoenix firm until 1998, when he'd abruptly left the practice and moved to Seattle. He'd worked there for a few years, then dropped off the grid entirely around 2004. No tax returns after 2004, the tech analyst told her. No employment records, no credit card usage, no property ownership. It's like he vanished. Or died. Webb suggested. If he died, there's no death certificate on file anywhere in the country. Chen stared at Victor Brennan's driver's license photo from 1997. He bore a strong resemblance to his brother Thomas, the same kind eyes and gentle features. But there was something else in his expression, something harder to define. A sadness, maybe, or a weariness. Let's talk to Elena, Chen said. Find out what she knows about her brother-in-law. They found Elena at home, her sister Claire sitting beside her on the couch. When Chen and Webb arrived, Elena's face showed the strain of the past few days. She'd been told that her husband and son's bodies had been positively identified, but Chen had held back the worst detail, the fact that Daniel had been kept alive for days or weeks. Now, looking at this woman who had already suffered so much, Chen found herself dreading what she had to say. Mrs. Brennan, we need to ask you about your brother-in-law, Victor. Elena's expression shifted, something guarded entering her eyes. Victor. Why? When did you last see him? It's been years. 20, maybe more. After Thomas and Daniel disappeared, Victor was very involved in trying to find them. He pushed the police, hired private investigators with his own money, did everything he could, but after about a year he just stopped. He told me he was moving to Seattle for work, and we lost touch. Did he ever seem strange to you? Webb asked. Did anything about his behavior stand out? Elena thought about it. He was devastated by their disappearance. Thomas was his only sibling, and they were very close. Victor took it hard, maybe even harder than I did in some ways. He became obsessed with finding them. Obsessed how? Chen pressed. He would spend hours going over police reports, mapping out theories, following leads that the police had dismissed. He barely slept. His wife left him because he wouldn't let it go. Elena paused. Is Victor in trouble? Do you think he knows something about what happened? We're just trying to locate everyone who was involved in the original investigation, Chen said carefully. Do you have any contact information for him? Any way to reach him? No. Like I said, we lost touch years ago, but his ex-wife might know where he is. Her name is Denise Brennan, though she probably went back to her maiden name after the divorce. Denise Carver. Back in the car, Webb pulled up records for Denise Carver. She still lived in Phoenix, worked as a real estate agent. They called her office and were told she was showing a property, but would be available in an hour. While they waited, Chen's phone rang. It was the medical examiner. Detective Chen, I have preliminary toxicology results on Daniel Brennan's remains. There were traces of benzodiazepines in his system, specifically diazepam. Someone was drugging that boy, keeping him sedated. Chen closed her eyes, fighting back a wave of nausea. What about Thomas Brennan? No drugs in his system, just blunt force trauma to the skull, consistent with being struck from behind with a heavy object. He would have died quickly. At least Thomas had been spared knowing what would happen to his son, Chen thought. At least he hadn't lived to see Daniel drugged and kept captive. They met Denise Carver at a coffee shop near her office. She was a polished woman in her late 50s, with expensive highlights and the kind of professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. When Chen and Webb identified themselves and explained why they were there, the smile vanished entirely. "Victor," she said, her voice flat. "I haven't spoken to him in 15 years. We're trying to locate him," Chen explained. "He was involved in the investigation into his brother's disappearance, and we need to ask him some follow-up questions." Denise laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Good luck with that. Victor Brennan is a ghost. He disappeared almost as thoroughly as his brother did." "What do you mean?" Webb asked. Denise stirred her coffee, not drinking it. "After Thomas and Daniel vanished, Victor lost his mind. Not all at once, but slowly, methodically. He quit his job, cashed out his retirement accounts, spent every dime on private investigators and psychics and anyone who claimed they could help find his brother. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating. He would stay up all night making charts and graphs, convinced there was some pattern he was missing. When did you divorce him?" 2000. I couldn't watch him destroy himself anymore. I tried to help, but he wouldn't listen to anyone. She looked up at them, her eyes hard. "But here's the thing. Right before we split up, Victor started talking about a theory he'd developed. He said he'd figured out what happened to Thomas and Daniel. He said he knew who was responsible." Chen leaned forward. "Did he tell you who?" "No. He said it was better if I didn't know. He said knowing would put me in danger." Denise's hand trembled slightly on her coffee cup. "A week later, he emptied our bank accounts and left. I got divorce papers in the mail 6 months after that, already signed. I never saw him again." "Did he ever mention a Captain Frank Morrison?" Chen asked. Denise's eyes widened. "Yes. He hated Morrison. Said Morrison had sabotaged the investigation, that he was covering for someone. Victor was convinced Morrison was dirty, but he couldn't prove it." "Did he ever mention anyone else? Any names of people he suspected?" "There was one name he mentioned a few times. David something. David Martin, maybe. He said this David Martin was the key to everything, but he could never find any trace of him. It was like the man didn't exist." Chen and Webb exchanged glances. David Martin. The fake name Michael Foster had been given by the man with the scar. "Ms. Carver," Chen said carefully, "if Victor contacted you now, if he reached out for any reason, we need you to call us immediately." "Why? What's happened?" "We found Thomas and Daniel's bodies. They were murdered and buried near an old rest stop. We're working to identify their killer." The color drained from Denise's face. "Oh God. Victor was right. He was right all along." After they left the coffee shop, Chen and Webb sat in the car, piecing together what they knew. "Victor Brennan figured something out," Webb said. "Something big enough to make him abandon his entire life and disappear." "And Morrison was dirty," Chen added. "He deliberately sabotaged the investigation, steered Garrett away from the rest stop where the bodies were buried." "So the question is, who paid Morrison to interfere? Who had that kind of money and influence?" Chen's phone buzzed with an email from the tech unit. The subject line read, "Frank Morrison Financial Records, Urgent." She opened it and felt her blood run cold. "Marcus, look at this. In August 1997, 1 month after the Brennans disappeared, Frank Morrison deposited $25,000 in cash into his personal savings account. No explanation, no documentation. A payoff," Webb said. "And look at this. There were 3 more deposits over the next year, $10,000 in November 1997, $15,000 in March 1998, another $10,000 in July 1998. $60,000 total, all in cash, all unexplained. Someone paid him to bury the investigation, Webb said. The question is who? Chen scrolled through the rest of the financial records, looking for any other anomalies. And then she found it. A single check, written by Morrison in September 1997, made out to someone named Gerald Voss for $5,000. The memo line read, "Consultation services." Who is Gerald Voss? She wondered aloud. Webb was already typing on his phone. After a moment, he looked up, his face grim. Gerald Voss owns a construction and excavation company, Voss Industries. They specialize in large-scale earth-moving projects. The implications settled over them like ice water. Morrison paid an excavation company owner $5,000 2 months after the Brennans disappeared, Chen said slowly. An excavation company that would have had the equipment and expertise to bury a car 8 feet underground. We need to talk to Gerald Voss, Webb said, already starting the car. Right now. Voss Industries occupied a sprawling compound on the outskirts of Phoenix, surrounded by chain-link fencing and filled with heavy machinery. Excavators, bulldozers, dump trucks painted in faded yellow. Chen and Webb pulled up to the main office, a modular building that looked like it had been temporary 20 years ago and simply never replaced. The receptionist, a young woman with bright pink nails, looked up from her computer with a professional smile. "Can I help you?" "We need to speak with Gerald Voss," Chen said, showing her badge. "It's urgent." The smile faltered. "Mr. Voss is in a meeting right now. Can I tell him what this is regarding?" "Tell him it's about Frank Morrison." The receptionist picked up the phone, spoke quietly for a moment, then hung up, looking slightly pale. "He'll see you now. Second door on the right." Gerald Voss's office was utilitarian, walls covered with blueprints and project photographs. The man himself was in his early 70s, powerfully built despite his age, with calloused hands and the kind of deep tan that came from decades working outdoors. He stood when they entered, his expression carefully neutral. "Detectives, I have to say, I'm surprised to hear Frank Morrison's name after all these years. He's been dead, 15 years now?" 16, Webb corrected. "But we're not here about his death. We're here about money he paid you in September 1997. Voss's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That was a long time ago. I don't remember every transaction from nearly 30 years back." Chen pulled out a copy of the check. $5,000. "The memo says consultation services. What kind of consultation?" "I'd have to check my records." "Please do," Chen said, her voice hard. "We'll wait." Voss held her gaze for a moment, then moved to a filing cabinet. He made a show of searching through folders, but Chen noticed his hands were steady. Whatever nervousness he felt, he was controlling it well. "Here it is," Voss said finally, pulling out a folder. Morrison wanted advice on a residential project. He was thinking of buying some land, needed to know about excavation costs, soil stability, that kind of thing. "Residential project," Webb repeated flatly. Frank Morrison, who lived in a modest house in Glendale his entire life, suddenly needed large-scale excavation consultation. That's what he said. I gave him some estimates, some advice. That's all. Chen leaned forward. "Mr. Voss, 3 days ago we recovered a vehicle that had been buried 8 feet underground in the desert. It had been there since July 1997. Inside that vehicle were the murdered remains of a father and his 12-year-old son." Something flickered in Voss's eyes. Fear, Chen thought. Definite fear. "I don't know anything about that," he said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "The burial site was near the old Desert Vista rest stop," Webb continued. "It would have required professional equipment to excavate a hole that deep, to lower the vehicle into it, to fill it back in without leaving obvious traces. The kind of equipment your company specializes in." "I've never buried a car in the desert," Voss said, his voice rising slightly. If that's what you're implying, you're way off base. We're not implying anything, Chen said. We're stating facts. Frank Morrison paid you $5,000 2 months after a double homicide. A homicide that required exactly the kind of expertise your company provides. Voss stood abruptly. If you're going to accuse me of murder, I want a lawyer present. Otherwise, this conversation is over. We're not accusing you of murder, Chen said calmly. Not yet, but we are investigating a payoff Morrison made with money he received for sabotaging a police investigation, and that payment went to you. So either you tell us what you did for Morrison, or we get a warrant and tear through every record you have until we find the answer ourselves. The silence stretched out. Voss remained standing, his hands clenched at his sides, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he sank back into his chair. I didn't know what it was for, he said quietly. I swear to God, I didn't know. Tell us what happened, Webb said. Voss rubbed his face with both hands. Morrison called me in late July 1997. Said he needed a favor, off the books. Said someone needed some excavation work done. No questions asked, no paperwork. He offered me $5,000 to loan out some equipment and keep my mouth shut. What equipment? A backhoe. Morrison said someone would pick it up, use it for a few hours, and return it. I was supposed to make sure none of my employees knew about it. Supposed to say it was in the shop for repairs if anyone asked. And you agreed, Chen said, barely concealing her disgust. $5,000 was a lot of money in 1997, Voss said defensively. My business was struggling. I needed it. Morrison said it was just for some private property work, that the guy doing it didn't want to go through official channels because of permit issues. When was the backhoe taken? July 19th, 1997. Late at night. Morrison called me around 8 p.m., said the guy was coming by to pick it up. One day after Thomas and Daniel Brennan had been taken. One day after Thomas had been murdered. Chen felt sick. Did you see who took the backhoe? Webb asked. No. I left the keys in the ignition and went home like Morrison told me. When I came in the next morning, the backhoe was back, parked in the same spot. There was mud on it, desert dirt. I hosed it down and didn't think about it again until Morrison paid me a few weeks later. You never asked what it was used for? Voss's face hardened. I didn't want to know. And for almost 30 years, I've done a pretty good job of not thinking about it. But when I heard about those bodies being found near the rest stop, I knew. Somehow, I just knew. Did Morrison ever mention who needed the backhoe? Chen pressed. Any name at all? No, he was careful about that. But I got the impression it wasn't for Morrison himself. He was arranging it for someone else. Someone with money and connections. David Martin, Webb said. Did that name ever come up? Voss shook his head. Never heard it. Chen stood, pulling out a business card. If you remember anything else, anything at all, you call me immediately. And Mr. Voss, if we find out you knew more than you're telling us, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your life in prison as an accessory to murder. Voss took the card with a shaking hand. I really didn't know what it was for. You have to believe me. Outside, in the scorching afternoon heat, Webb leaned against their car. He knew. Maybe not the details, but he knew something wrong was happening. And he took the money anyway, Chen said bitterly. God, how many people were involved in covering this up? Morrison, Voss, whoever actually used that backhoe. Her phone rang. It was Elena Brennan. Detective Chen, I remembered something. About Victor. He had a storage unit, a place where he kept all his investigation materials. When we divorced, Denise mentioned he'd rented it under a fake name so no one could trace it to him. I don't know if it's still there, but the facility was on Indian School Road near 32nd Street. Did Denise tell you the fake name? David Martin. He rented it under the name David Martin. Chen felt the world tilt. Mrs. Brennan, are you absolutely certain? Yes, I remember because at the time, I thought it was strange. Why would Victor need to use a fake name for a storage unit? After hanging up, Chen turned to Webb. Victor Brennan was using the same name as the man who threatened Michael Foster. The same name that doesn't seem to exist anywhere in any database. That's not a coincidence, Webb said. Victor either was David Martin, or he was investigating someone using that name and adopted it for some reason. We need to find that storage unit. The facility on Indian School Road was a sprawling complex of orange doors and concrete walkways. The manager, a bored-looking man in his 40s, barely glanced at their badges before pulling up his computer records. David Martin, you said? Let me check. He typed, scrolled, typed again. Yeah, Unit 247. Been rented continuously since 1998. Paid up through the end of this year. Who pays the rental fees? Chen asked. Automatic bank withdrawal. Same account for the last 26 years. We need access to that unit. Now. The manager grabbed a bolt cutter. You got a warrant? We can have one in 30 minutes, or you can open it now and cooperate with an active murder investigation. The manager considered this, then grabbed his keys. Unit 247 is this way. They followed him through the maze of units until they reached 247. The door was secured with a heavy padlock. The manager cut through it, and Webb pulled the door up, metal screeching against metal. Inside, the 10-by-10 space was lined with shelves and filing boxes. The walls were covered with maps, photographs, newspaper clippings, all connected by red string in the classic conspiracy theorist pattern. But as Chen stepped inside and began examining the materials, she realized this was no paranoid delusion. This was methodical, meticulous research. My God, Webb breathed beside her. Victor was building a case. The center of one wall was dominated by a photograph of a man. Tall, dark-haired, with cold eyes and a thin smile. Beneath it, written in thick black marker, were the words, "Found him." Is that our suspect? Chen asked, pulling out her phone to photograph it. Webb was examining the documents on the shelves. These are financial records, property deeds, corporate filings. Victor was following a money trail. He pulled out a thick folder labeled Meridian Design Group. That's where Thomas Brennan worked, Chen said. Webb opened the folder, reading quickly. According to this, Meridian was involved in some kind of scandal in the mid-90s. Something about falsified safety reports on a commercial construction project. The project was a shopping mall. It collapsed during construction, killed 3 workers. I remember that case, Chen said. It was all over the news, but I thought the company responsible was cleared of wrongdoing. They were. The official investigation concluded it was a structural failure, not negligence. Webb kept reading. But Victor's notes suggest Thomas Brennan knew something about that investigation, that he had evidence the safety reports were deliberately falsified. Chen felt pieces clicking into place. Thomas Brennan was a civil engineer at Meridian. If he discovered the company had falsified reports that led to people dying, and if he was planning to report it, he'd be a threat, Webb finished, a serious threat to whoever was responsible. Chen moved to another section of the wall, where Victor had assembled what looked like a timeline. At the top, March 1995, mall collapse. Below that, a series of dates and events, each meticulously documented. April 1995. Official investigation begins. June 1995. Meridian Design Group cleared of liability. September 1995. Thomas Brennan requests transfer to different department. July 1997. Thomas and Daniel disappear. He tried to transfer departments, Chen said. 2 years before he disappeared, Thomas Brennan tried to move away from whatever project he was working on. Webb pulled out another folder, this one filled with photographs. Look at this. This is from a corporate event at Meridian in 1996. He pointed to one figure in the photo, standing at the edge of the frame, tall, dark-haired, watching the camera with cold eyes. It was the same man from the photograph on the wall. Chen flipped the photo over. On the back, in Victor's handwriting, Lawrence Pierce, Senior VP of Development, Meridian Design Group. Lawrence Pierce, Chen repeated. She pulled out her phone and called the tech unit. I need everything you can find on Lawrence Pierce, former VP at Meridian Design Group. Financials, criminal record, current location, everything. While they waited for the information, Chen and Webb continued examining the storage unit's contents. Victor had accumulated a staggering amount of evidence. Bank statements showing large cash withdrawals, property records indicating Pierce owned a ranch property northeast of Phoenix, witness statements Victor had collected himself from former Meridian employees. One statement in particular caught Chen's attention. It was from a woman named Barbara Kelso, dated October 2001. Thomas came to me 3 weeks before he disappeared, the statement read. He showed me documents proving that Lawrence Pierce had ordered the falsification of structural calculations on the Westfield Mall project. Thomas said he was planning to take the evidence to the state licensing board after he got back from Boston. He asked me to keep copies of everything just in case something happened to him. I was supposed to deliver them to the authorities if I didn't hear from him by August 1st, 1997. But when the time came, I got scared. Pierce had a reputation for being dangerous. I destroyed the copies and kept my mouth shut. I've regretted it every day since. Lawrence Pierce ordered the falsification of reports that killed 3 people, Webb said, and Thomas Brennan found out about it. So Pierce had him killed, Chen said, along with his 12-year-old son, who was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Her phone rang. The tech unit. Detective Chen, we've got information on Lawrence Pierce. He left Meridian Design Group in 1998. Since then, he's owned several businesses, mostly real estate development. Currently lives on a 100-acre ranch property near Cave Creek. And, Detective, we found something interesting. Pierce has a distinctive scar on his left hand, between the thumb and index finger. Burn mark from an industrial accident in the 80s. The same scar Michael Foster had described. We need to bring him in, Webb said. On what grounds? A scar and 29-year-old circumstantial evidence? We have enough for a search warrant at least. If Victor's research is accurate, Pierce had motive and opportunity. Chen was already calling the district attorney's office. They needed to move carefully, build an airtight case. But for the first time since this investigation began, she felt like they were closing in on the truth. The question was, what had happened to Victor Brennan? Had he confronted Pierce with this evidence? Was he still alive somewhere, still investigating? Or had Pierce gotten to him too? She thought of the photograph on the wall, the words "found him" written beneath Pierce's face. Victor had found the man responsible for his brother's murder. But what had he done with that information? We need to move fast, Chen said. If Victor is still alive and Pierce knows we're investigating, he might try to eliminate any remaining threats. And if Victor's already dead, Webb added grimly. Pierce has been getting away with murder for 30 years. It's time to end that. The search warrant for Lawrence Pierce's property came through at 6 a.m. the following morning. Chen had barely slept, spending the night reviewing every document in Victor Brennan's storage unit, building a timeline of events that painted a damning picture of premeditated murder and decades of cover-up. Now, as she and Webb joined a team of 8 officers in the pre-dawn darkness, she felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came before a major operation. They parked a quarter-mile from Pierce's ranch house, approaching on foot to maintain the element of surprise. The property was isolated, surrounded by desert scrubland and rocky hills. The main house was a sprawling adobe structure with a detached garage and several outbuildings. As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows across the landscape, Chen could see lights on in the main house. Detectives Chen and Webb, you're with me on the main house, the team leader, Sergeant Martinez, said quietly. Everyone else, secure the outbuildings. Remember, Pierce may be armed and should be considered extremely dangerous. They moved in quickly and professionally. Martinez pounded on the front door. Phoenix Police! Search warrant! Open the door! For a long moment, nothing. Then the door swung open, revealing a man in his early 60s, tall and lean, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of cold, assessing eyes Chen had seen in the photographs. Lawrence Pierce looked at the assembled officers without surprise, without fear, as if he'd been expecting this moment for years. "Detective Chen, I presume," he said calmly. "And Detective Webb. I've been reading about your investigation in the news. Remarkable work, really. Finding Thomas Brennan's car after all these years." "Lawrence Pierce, we have a warrant to search these premises," Chen said, handing him the paperwork. "Step aside, please." Pierce glanced at the warrant, then smiled slightly. "Of course. Please, come in. I have nothing to hide." The confidence in his voice set off alarm bells in Chen's mind. They'd caught him off guard with the early morning arrival, yet he seemed completely at ease. Either he was an exceptional actor, or he really did believe they would find nothing incriminating. As officers began methodically searching the house, Chen and Webb stayed with Pierce in the spacious living room. The space was expensively furnished, with Native American art on the walls and floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the desert landscape. "Thomas Brennan worked for you at Meridian Design Group," Chen said, not bothering with preliminaries. "He worked for the company, yes. I wouldn't say he worked for me personally. He discovered that you falsified safety reports on the Westfield Mall project, reports that led to the deaths of 3 construction workers." Pierce's expression didn't change. "That's an interesting theory. Do you have any evidence to support it?" "We have witness statements," Webb said. "We know Thomas Brennan planned to report you to the state licensing board." "Thomas Brennan has been missing for 29 years, Pierce pointed out. Anything he allegedly planned to do became irrelevant when he disappeared. "He didn't disappear," Chen said coldly. "He was murdered, along with his 12-year-old son. And we have evidence linking you to their deaths." "Do you?" Pierce settled back in his chair, crossing his legs casually. "Let me guess. You found some old files, some conspiracy theories assembled by Thomas's brother Victor. Poor Victor. He spent years chasing shadows, convinced I was some kind of criminal mastermind." "You know about Victor's investigation," Webb noted. "Of course I know. Victor made no secret of his obsession with me. He showed up at my office multiple times, making wild accusations. I almost filed a restraining order, but my lawyer advised against it. Said it would just encourage him." "When did you last see Victor Brennan?" Chen asked. Pierce thought for a moment. "It would have been around 2002, I think. He came to my office, ranting about how he'd figured everything out, how he was going to prove I killed his brother. I told him the same thing I'm telling you. I had nothing to do with Thomas Brennan's disappearance." "Where were you on July 18th, 1997? Webb asked. 29 years ago? I have no idea. At work, most likely. I kept a very regular schedule back then." One of the officers appeared in the doorway. "Detectives, you need to see this." Chen and Webb followed him through the house to what appeared to be a home office. The officer pointed to a locked filing cabinet. "Found a key hidden in the desk drawer. This cabinet is full of financial records going back decades." Chen pulled on gloves and began examining the files. Bank statements, wire transfers, property records. And there, tucked in among the legitimate business documents, she found something that made her pulse quicken. A ledger, handwritten, documenting cash payments made over a period of years. The entries were coded, but several stood out. FM, August 1997, $25,000. FM, November 1997, $10,000. FM, March 1998, $15,000. GV, September 1997, $5,000. Frank Morrison and Gerald Voss. The dates matched exactly. "Mr. Pierce," Chen said, returning to the living room with the ledger. "Can you explain these payments?" Pierce glanced at the ledger, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not fear exactly, but calculation. He was deciding how to play this. "Business expenses," he said finally. "Consultation fees for various projects. These are cash payments to a police captain and an excavation company owner," Webb said, "both of whom have connections to the Brennan case." "Prove it," Pierce said simply. "Prove those initials refer to the people you think they do. Prove those payments were for anything other than legitimate business purposes." Chen felt frustration building. He was right. The ledger was suggestive but not conclusive. They needed more. "Detective," another officer was calling from outside. "You need to see this right now." They found him standing near one of the outbuildings, a workshop or storage shed. The door stood open, revealing a space filled with tools and equipment. But what had caught the officer's attention was a large plastic tarp in the corner, covering something bulky. Chen approached carefully, pulling back the tarp. Underneath was a dark blue sedan, covered in dust, clearly untouched for years. "Run the plates," she ordered. While they waited for the results, Chen examined the car more closely. There was a dent in the rear bumper, just like Patricia Vance had described seeing at the rest stop in 1997. Her phone rang. The tech unit. "Detective, that vehicle is registered to Lawrence Pierce, a 1988 Honda Accord. But here's the interesting part. According to DMV records, that car was reported as sold for scrap in August 1997. So Pierce claimed he got rid of it, but he actually kept it hidden on his property for almost 30 years, Chen said. "This is the car that was at the rest stop. This is the car used to abduct Thomas and Daniel Brennan." They brought Pierce out to the workshop. His composure was finally starting to crack, a tightness around his eyes, a tension in his shoulders. "This vehicle was reported as scrapped in 1997, Chen said. "Why do you still have it?" "I changed my mind about scrapping it, decided to keep it for parts." "And hid it in a shed for 3 decades? "I forgot about it." Webb laughed humorlessly. "You forgot about a car that multiple witnesses saw at the scene of a double homicide." "What witnesses?" Pierce demanded. "Show me one credible witness who can place me at that rest stop." He was right again. Patricia Vance hadn't been able to identify the men she'd seen, just the cars. Michael Foster had only seen Pierce a week later, not at the actual crime scene. But Chen had one more card to play. "We're going to process this vehicle," she said. "Every fiber, every fingerprint, every trace of DNA. And when we find evidence linking it to Thomas and Daniel Brennan, you're finished." Something shifted in Pierce's expression, a coldness that made Chen's skin crawl. "You won't find anything," he said quietly. "I've had 29 years to make sure of that." It was as close to a confession as they were going to get. "Lawrence Pierce, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice and conspiracy," Chen said, pulling out her handcuffs. It wasn't murder yet, not without more evidence, but it was enough to hold him while they built their case. As Martinez read Pierce his rights, Chen's phone rang again. It was the officer who'd stayed behind to continue searching the main house. "Detective, we found something in the basement. You need to get back here immediately." The basement was accessed through a door in the kitchen. Chen descended the stairs, Webb close behind her. The space was finished, set up as a rec room with a bar and pool table. But the officer was standing by what looked like a storage closet, its door standing open. "We almost missed it," the officer explained. "There's a false wall at the back." Chen stepped into the closet and immediately saw what he meant. The back wall was actually a door, cleverly disguised to look like ordinary paneling. It stood ajar now, revealing a small room beyond. The room was perhaps 8 feet by 8 feet, with concrete walls and no windows. There was a bare mattress on the floor, brown stains that made Chen's stomach turn. Restraints bolted to the wall, and on a small shelf, a collection of items. A child's t-shirt, a Discman, a small sneaker. Daniel Brennan had been kept here. This was where Pierce had held a 12-year-old boy prisoner for days or weeks, drugging him, keeping him alive for purposes Chen didn't want to imagine. On the wall, scratched into the concrete with something sharp, were 2 words, "Help me." Below it, in smaller letters, Daniel B. Chen felt tears burning in her eyes. This boy had spent his final days in this horrible room, terrified and alone, not knowing if anyone was looking for him, not knowing his mother was searching desperately. And then, when Pierce had finished whatever sick game he was playing, he'd killed Daniel and buried him with his father. "Get a full forensic team down here," Chen said, her voice rough. "I want every inch of this room processed, every fiber, every hair, every molecule of DNA, and I want Lawrence Pierce charged with first-degree murder, 2 counts." Webb was photographing the scratched message when his phone rang. He listened for a moment, his expression darkening, then hung up. That was Sergeant Martinez. Pierce just asked for his lawyer, and not just any lawyer. He specifically asked for Victor Brennan. Chen turned to stare at him. Victor? But Victor's been missing for years. How would Pierce contact him? "Maybe he's not as missing as we thought," Webb said slowly. "Maybe Victor's been closer to this case than anyone realized." Chen's mind was racing. Victor had spent years investigating Pierce, had assembled damning evidence, had even rented a storage unit under a fake name to hide his research. What if he hadn't disappeared? What if he'd been watching, waiting, building his case from the shadows? And if Pierce was asking for Victor now, that meant he knew how to contact him, which meant the 2 men had been in communication. "We need to find Victor Brennan," Chen said, "before Pierce does." Lawrence Pierce sat in the interrogation room with the kind of stillness that unnerved even experienced detectives. He hadn't said a word since invoking his right to counsel, hadn't so much as shifted in his chair. He simply waited, his cold eyes fixed on the 2-way mirror, as if he could see through it to where Chen and Webb stood watching. "He's too calm," Webb muttered, "like he's playing a game and we don't know the rules." Chen pulled out her phone and dialed the number Victor Brennan's ex-wife had provided. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. The message was brief. "You've reached Victor Brennan. Leave a message." The voice was familiar somehow, though Chen couldn't place why. She left a message explaining who she was and asking Victor to call immediately regarding his brother's case. "Let's pull phone records for the storage unit payments," Chen said. "If Victor's been paying the rental fee for 26 years, there has to be a bank account, a phone number, something that leads back to him." While they waited for the records, Chen returned to Victor's storage unit with a forensic team. She wanted to go through everything again with fresh eyes, looking for any clue about where Victor might be now. The photographs on the wall drew her attention again. She studied each one carefully, noting the dates. Most were from the late 90s and early 2000s, but in the corner, partially hidden behind a map, was a more recent photo. Chen pulled it down and felt her heart skip. It showed Lawrence Pierce's ranch house, clearly photographed from a distance with a telephoto lens. In the bottom corner, written in ink, March 2024. Victor had been surveilling Pierce as recently as 2 months ago. He was still active, still investigating. "Look at this," Webb said from across the room. He'd found a laptop hidden in a locked case beneath one of the shelves. Modern, expensive. This wasn't here in 1998. Chen opened the laptop. It was password protected, but the tech team would be able to crack it. She bagged it as evidence, already calling to have it prioritized. Her phone rang. It was the Financial Crimes Unit. "Detective Chen, we traced the bank account paying for the storage unit. It's registered to a corporation called Sentinel Holdings, LLC. The corporation was established in 2004, and its registered agent is listed as David Martin." There was that name again. David Martin, who didn't exist. David Martin, who Victor had used as an alias. David Martin, who Michael Foster had been threatened by. "Who owns Sentinel Holdings?" Chen asked. "That's where it gets interesting. The ownership is structured through a series of shell companies, but we managed to trace it back. The ultimate beneficial owner is Elena Brennan." Chen nearly dropped the phone. What? Elena Brennan owns the corporation that's been paying for Victor's storage unit. Has been for the last 20 years. After hanging up, Chen stood in the storage unit trying to process this information. Elena had claimed she'd lost touch with Victor decades ago, but she'd been funding his investigation, keeping his research space active for 20 years. Either Elena had been lying, or someone had been using her name without her knowledge. Chen called Elena immediately. Mrs. Brennan, I need to ask you about Sentinel Holdings LLC. There was a pause. How did you find out about that? So you know about it. Elena sighed heavily. Yes. Victor set it up years ago. Put it in my name for legal reasons he never fully explained. He said it was to protect me, that if anyone traced it back, I could claim ignorance. I have been receiving paperwork about it for years, signing whatever Victor asked me to sign. Did you know he was using it to fund his investigation into your husband's death? I suspected. Victor would call me every few months, never more than that, always from different numbers. He'd ask how I was doing, tell me he was still looking for answers. He said he was close, that he almost had everything he needed to prove what happened. When did you last hear from him? 3 weeks ago. He called to tell me about the construction project at the rest stop. He'd been monitoring the site somehow, knew they were going to start excavating. He said the truth was finally going to come out. Chen felt a chill. Victor knew the bodies were going to be found. He knew because he's known where they were all along. That's impossible, Elena said. If Victor knew where Thomas and Daniel were buried, he would have told the police immediately. Unless he had a reason not to, Webb said quietly. Unless he was building a case so airtight that Pierce couldn't escape justice. Chen ended the call and turned to Webb. Victor's been orchestrating this. The construction project didn't just happen to uncover the bodies. Victor made sure they'd be found. He's been waiting 29 years for this moment. Her phone rang again. The tech unit had cracked Victor's laptop. Detective, you need to see this. We found video files, hundreds of them going back years. Back at the station, Chen sat down at a computer and opened the first file. It was dated November 2003 and showed grainy footage of Lawrence Pierce's ranch house, clearly filmed from a concealed position some distance away. Victor had been conducting surveillance for over 20 years. She skipped ahead to more recent files. March 2024 showed Pierce loading something into his truck. April 2024 showed him meeting with someone in a parking lot, exchanging what looked like an envelope. But it was the file dated May 15th, 2024, just 3 weeks ago, that made Chen's blood run cold. The footage showed a man approaching Pierce's ranch house on foot after dark. The figure was wearing dark clothing, face obscured by a hood. He moved with purpose, clearly familiar with the property layout, avoiding security cameras. The man entered through a side door, disappeared from view for approximately 40 minutes, then emerged and vanished into the darkness. He broke into Pierce's house, Webb said. Recently. Chen fast-forwarded to the next file, dated May 16th. It showed Pierce discovering something in his house, his face contorted with rage. He was on his phone, gesturing angrily. Victor was sending him a message, Chen realized, letting Pierce know he was being watched, that evidence was being gathered. The most recent file was dated May 20th, just 5 days ago, before the bodies were even discovered. It showed a figure Chen now recognized as Victor, standing on a hilltop overlooking the old rest stop. He was filming the construction equipment beginning its excavation work. At the end of the video, the camera turned, and for the first time, Chen saw Victor Brennan's face. He looked nothing like the photographs from 1997. He'd aged hard, his face lined and weathered, his hair completely gray, but his eyes were fierce, burning with an intensity that spoke of decades of focused rage. He looked directly into the camera and spoke. 29 years of watching, waiting, gathering evidence, and now it's finally time. Pierce thought he'd gotten away with it, Thought he could bury the truth along with my brother and nephew, but the truth doesn't stay buried forever. If you're watching this, it means the bodies have been found. It means Detective Chen and her team are doing their job, and it means I can finally do mine." The video ended. Chen sat in stunned silence. Victor had planned everything. He'd known the construction company was going to excavate the rest stop because he'd researched the permits, tracked the timeline. He'd made sure his storage unit would be found by leaving breadcrumbs for the investigation to follow. He'd been stage managing this entire revelation. "Where is he now?" Webb asked. "What's his endgame?" Chen's phone rang. It was the desk sergeant, his voice urgent. "Detective, we just got a call. There's been a break-in at the county jail. Someone accessed the cell block where Lawrence Pierce is being held." Chen and Webb ran for their car, sirens blaring as they raced to the jail. When they arrived, they found the facility on lockdown, guards searching frantically. "What happened?" Chen demanded. The head guard looked shaken. "Someone came in through the service entrance around midnight, dressed as maintenance. They had proper ID, knew all the right codes. By the time we realized something was wrong, they'd accessed the cell block." "Is Pierce still there?" "Yes, but someone was in his cell. We found this on his bed." The guard handed Chen a manila envelope. Inside was a thick stack of documents. Bank records, wire transfers, sworn affidavits from former Meridian employees, photographs of the hidden room in Pierce's basement taken years before the police had found it, and a note, handwritten. "Everything you need to ensure he never sees freedom again. The evidence is irrefutable. The case is airtight. Justice will be served. VB." Victor was here, Chen breathed. He broke into a county jail just to deliver evidence. "And to send Pierce a message," Webb added, "that there's no escape, that Victor has been documenting everything, building a case for 3 decades. Chen looked at the documents. They were meticulous, professional, exactly the kind of evidence that would convince a jury. Financial records proving Pierce had paid off Morrison and Voss. Witness statements from people who'd been too afraid to come forward in 1997, but had been carefully interviewed by Victor over the years. Photographs of Pierce with known criminals, dated and time-stamped. Victor Brennan had spent 29 years becoming an expert investigator, tracking a serial killer, assembling evidence that no defense attorney could dismiss. "We need to find him," Chen said, "before he does something that destroys his own case." But even as she said it, she wondered if Victor had any intention of being found. He'd been a ghost for 26 years, living in the shadows, dedicated to a single purpose. Now that the bodies had been discovered, now that Pierce was in custody, what did Victor have left? Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check Pierce's phone records from last night. He made a call. That's who you're really looking for. V." Chen immediately requested Pierce's phone logs. One call, made at 11:47 p.m. the previous night, just before Victor had broken into the jail. The number was registered to a burner phone, but the tech team was able to trace its location. "It pinged off a tower in Cave Creek," the analyst told her, "near Pierce's ranch." Who was at the ranch? Chen wondered aloud. Webb was already pulling up surveillance footage from the jail's visiting records. "Look at this. 3 days ago, Pierce had a visitor. Signed in as his attorney, but the ID was fake. The camera's got a partial face shot. The image was grainy, but showed a man in his 40s with dark hair and cold eyes. Not Pierce, not Victor, but someone Chen felt she should recognize." She pulled up the files from Victor's storage unit, comparing photos. And there it was. A photograph from 2015, labeled Mitchell Caldwell, Pierce's enforcer and probable accomplice in multiple homicides. "Pierce called his enforcer," Chen said, "warned him that the investigation was closing in. And Victor's telling us to find Caldwell before he disappears," Webb finished. They had an address from DMV records. Mitchell Caldwell lived in a modest house in Glendale, not far from where Frank Morrison had lived. Chen wondered if that was a coincidence. as they organized a team to bring Caldwell in. Chen's phone rang one more time. It was Elena Brennan. "Detective, Victor just called me. He said he's sorry for putting me through all these years of uncertainty. He said it's almost over, and I'll finally have peace." Elena's voice broke. He sounded like he was saying goodbye. The raid on Mitchell Caldwell's house happened at dawn. Chen and Webb led a team of 8 officers, moving quickly and quietly through the residential neighborhood. The house was dark. No vehicles in the driveway, no signs of life. They breached the door and swept through the rooms with practiced efficiency. Empty. The house looked abandoned, though there were signs of recent occupation. Dishes in the sink, unmade bed, clothes in the closet. "He's in the wind," Webb said, frustration evident in his voice. But Chen was examining the kitchen counter, where a laptop sat open. The screen was dark, but when she touched the trackpad, it came to life. The browser history showed a search for flights to Mexico, then another for car rentals in Tucson. "He's running," she said. "Probably got spooked when Pierce was arrested." On the counter beside the laptop was a cell phone. Chen pulled on gloves and checked the recent calls. Multiple calls to and from Lawrence Pierce's number, and one text message sent 12 hours ago. "Loose ends need to be tied up. You know what to do." Pierce ordered him to clean up, Webb said. But clean up what? Chen thought of Victor, thought of his message about Caldwell being who they should really be looking for. Victor knew something they didn't. She called the tech unit. "I need a location trace on Mitchell Caldwell's phone, and I need it now." While they waited, Chen explored the rest of the house. In the bedroom closet, hidden behind hanging clothes, she found a safe. It wasn't locked, the door standing slightly ajar as if someone had left in a hurry. Inside were stacks of cash, several fake IDs, and a manila folder. Chen opened the folder and felt her blood run cold. It contained photographs of Daniel Brennan. Not the family photos that had been released to the media, but surveillance photos. Daniel at school. Daniel playing in his yard. Daniel getting into his father's car. These photos had been taken in the weeks before the abduction. Pierce and Caldwell had been watching the Brennans, planning, choosing their moment. But there was more. Beneath the photos were newspaper clippings about the 1995 mall collapse, and tucked among them was a handwritten note. "Thomas Brennan knows. He has copies of the falsified reports. Must be handled before he reports us. DMDM David Martin." Not Victor's alias. Not the fake name given to Michael Foster. This was someone else. Someone real. Someone who had ordered Thomas Brennan's death. Chen's phone rang. The tech unit. "Detective, we've got a location on Caldwell's phone. It's at a warehouse complex in South Phoenix near the airport. Send me the address, and send backup. Lots of backup." The warehouse complex was a sprawling collection of industrial buildings, most of them vacant or underused. Caldwell's phone signal was coming from a building at the far end, a structure that, according to property records, was owned by one of Pierce's shell companies. Chen and Webb approached carefully, backup units taking positions around the perimeter. The building's main door was ajar, swinging slightly in the desert breeze. Inside, the warehouse was dim and cavernous, filled with empty pallets and abandoned equipment. Chen moved forward slowly, her weapon drawn, every sense alert. "Phoenix Police," she called out. "Mitchell Caldwell, show yourself." The response was a sound from the back of the building, metal scraping against concrete. Chen signaled to Webb, and they advanced toward the source of the noise. What they found made Chen's stomach turn. In the back corner of the warehouse, Mitchell Caldwell lay on the ground, blood pooling beneath him. He'd been shot twice in the chest, the wound still fresh. "Officer down," Webb called, though Caldwell was clearly not an officer. "We need paramedics." But as Chen knelt beside Caldwell, she could see it was too late. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, his breathing shallow and labored. "Who did this?" Chen demanded, leaning close. "Caldwell, who shot you?" His lips moved, barely a whisper. "Martin, David Martin." Then his breathing stopped entirely. Chen stood, scanning the warehouse. Whoever had shot Caldwell might still be here, but a thorough search revealed nothing. The shooter was gone. Near Caldwell's body, Chen found his phone. The last call he'd made was to a number she recognized, Lawrence Pierce. The last text he'd received was from an unknown number. "Meet me at the warehouse. We need to talk about our problem. DM." David Martin had lured Caldwell here and executed him. Chen's mind raced. Victor had been using the name David Martin. Victor had told them to look for Caldwell. Victor had known Caldwell would be a problem that needed to be eliminated. But Victor wasn't a killer. He was a lawyer, a man who believed in justice, who had spent decades building a legal case against Pierce. Unless... Chen pulled out her phone and called the storage unit manager. The unit rented under the name David Martin, Unit 247. "I need to know if anyone has accessed it in the last 24 hours. Let me check the logs." A pause. "Yes, someone entered the unit yesterday at 3:47 p.m., stayed for about 20 minutes. Do you have security footage?" "Of course. I'll pull it up now." 5 minutes later, Chen was watching grainy security footage on her phone. A figure approached Unit 247, unlocked it, and went inside. When they emerged 20 minutes later, they were carrying a large duffel bag. The person looked directly at the camera for just a moment, and Chen felt her world tilt. It wasn't Victor Brennan. It was Elena. Chen called Webb over, showed him the footage. "That's Elena Brennan. She accessed the storage unit yesterday, took something from it. The gun used to kill Caldwell," Webb suggested, but that didn't make sense. Elena was a victim, a grieving mother and widow who had spent 29 years searching for answers. Unless she hadn't been searching. Unless she'd known all along. Chen's phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. "Check Pierce's basement again, behind the water heater. Elena should have told you years ago, but she was protecting me. V." They raced back to Pierce's ranch house, which was still secured as a crime scene. Chen led the way to the basement, to the hidden room where Daniel Brennan had been held captive. Behind the water heater, exactly as Victor had said, they found a metal box. Inside was a digital camera, old but still functional. Chen turned it on, and her hands began to shake. The camera contained dozens of photos. Photos of the hidden room, photos of restraints and drug bottles, photos of Daniel Brennan's belongings carefully arranged as if catalogued, and photos of a figure Chen now recognized. Elena Brennan, standing in the room, her face twisted with an expression of cold satisfaction. The photos were dated July 1997. "Oh my God," Webb breathed. Elena was there. She was part of it. Chen scrolled through more photos, her mind refusing to accept what she was seeing, but the evidence was irrefutable. The final photo showed Elena standing beside Lawrence Pierce, both of them smiling. In the background, just visible, was a young boy's shoe. Chen's phone rang. It was Victor. "You found the camera," he said without preamble. "Good. I'm sorry you had to learn the truth this way, but you needed to see it for yourselves." "Victor, where are you?" "Somewhere safe. Somewhere I can finally rest now that the truth is out." Elena was involved in her own husband and son's murders, Chen said, still struggling to process it. "Why? What possible reason?" "Money," Victor said bitterly. Thomas had a $5 million life insurance policy. Double indemnity if his death was ruled accidental or if he was declared legally dead after 7 years missing. Elena and Pierce were having an affair. Pierce needed Thomas silenced before he could report the falsified safety reports. Elena wanted the insurance money and freedom to be with Pierce. They solved both problems with one crime. And Daniel. Victor's voice broke. Daniel was insurance. Pierce kept him alive to make sure Elena wouldn't lose her nerve, wouldn't confess. As long as Daniel was alive, Elena had to stay quiet, had to play the grieving mother perfectly. They told her that if she cooperated, they'd let Daniel go after a few weeks. But Pierce never intended to let him go. That boy could identify them both. Chen felt sick. Elena has been lying for 29 years, playing the victim while her son was tortured and murdered because she valued money and her affair more than her family. Victor finished. I've spent 29 years proving it. I have recordings of her conversations with Pierce. I have financial records showing her depositing the insurance money. I have everything you need to put her away forever. Where is Elena now? Chen demanded. Check her house. I called her this morning, told her it was time to face what she'd done. She knows it's over. Chen and Webb raced to Elena's house with a full tactical team. The front door was unlocked. Inside, they found Elena sitting calmly in her living room, a packed suitcase by the door. She looked up when they entered, and Chen saw no surprise on her face. Only resignation. It's over, isn't it? Elena said quietly. Victor finally did it. He finally proved everything. Elena Brennan, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, Chen said, pulling out her handcuffs. And for the murders of Thomas and Daniel Brennan. Elena didn't resist. As Chen read her rights, Elena began to speak. I love Thomas, she said, her voice distant. I really did, but Lawrence offered me everything Thomas couldn't. Money, excitement, a life beyond being a civil engineer's wife in the suburbs. And when Lawrence said Thomas had become a problem, that he had to be dealt with, I convinced myself it was the only way. And Daniel? Webb asked, his voice hard. Your 12-year-old son. Elena's face crumpled. I didn't know Pierce would kill him. He promised me Daniel would be released, that we'd stage it like he'd escaped or been found. But after 2 weeks, Pierce told me Daniel had seen too much, knew too much. He said it had to be done. And you let it happen, Chen said, disgust evident in her voice. You let Pierce murder your son. I've lived in hell for 29 years, Elena whispered. Every day, knowing what I'd done, knowing Daniel died because of me. Victor knew. Somehow, he knew from the beginning. He's been watching me, documenting everything, waiting for the right moment to destroy me. Where is Victor now? Chen asked. I don't know. He called this morning, said he'd left evidence with the police, said it was finally time for me to pay for what I'd done. He said he was going to be with Thomas and Daniel now, that he'd see them soon and tell them justice had been served. Chen felt a chill. What does that mean? Where did he go? Elena looked up, tears streaming down her face. I think Victor's been dying for years. Cancer, maybe, or something else. He said last time we spoke that he didn't have much time left. He said he'd stayed alive long enough to see this through to make sure we all paid. But now that it's done, Chen was already calling for a search team, requesting a trace on Victor's last known location. But something told her they wouldn't find him alive. Victor Brennan had spent 29 years with a single purpose, to expose the truth about his brother's murder and ensure those responsible faced justice. Now that purpose was fulfilled. The question was whether Victor would let himself be found, or whether he'd simply disappear into the desert he'd spent 3 decades walking through as a ghost. 6 months after the arrest of Elena Brennan and Lawrence Pierce, Detective Sarah Chen stood at the edge of the desert overlook where construction workers had first unearthed the silver Camry. The site had been cleared now, the evidence processed, the earth smoothed over. Soon, the commercial development would break ground, and this place would become just another shopping center in Phoenix's endless sprawl. But Chen would always know what had been buried here, would always remember the horror of that hidden room, the scratched plea for help on concrete walls, the 29 years of calculated deception. The trials had been swift. Faced with Victor Brennan's meticulous evidence, both Pierce and Elena had accepted plea deals. Pierce received 2 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. Elena received the same, with an additional 30 years for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The full story had emerged during their confessions. Elena and Pierce's affair had begun in 1996, When Thomas Brennan discovered the falsified safety reports and told Elena he was planning to report Pierce to the licensing board, she'd warned her lover. Together, they'd plotted to eliminate Thomas and make it look like a disappearance. The plan had been simple and cruel. Pierce would intercept them on their way to the airport, force them to the rest stop, murder Thomas, and take Daniel. Elena would play the devastated wife and mother while collecting the insurance money. After a few weeks, they'd stage Daniel's escape or discovery, traumatized but alive. But Pierce had decided Daniel was too great a risk. The boy had seen his face, could identify him. And Pierce had discovered he enjoyed the power, the control, the fear in those young eyes. When he finally killed Daniel 2 weeks after Thomas's murder, Elena had been horrified but powerless to do anything without implicating herself. Mitchell Caldwell, Pierce's longtime accomplice, had helped with the burial and the cover-up. He'd been the one to actually operate the backhoe, to excavate the grave deep enough that it would never be found by accident. And Captain Frank Morrison had ensured the police investigation went nowhere, steering detectives away from the crucial evidence, dismissing witness reports, allowing the case to go cold. All of it documented in excruciating detail by Victor Brennan over 29 years of patient, obsessive investigation. Chen's phone buzzed with a message from Marcus Webb. They found him. Her heart sank as she read the details. A hiker had discovered a body in the Superstition Mountains, 30 miles east of Phoenix. The medical examiner had confirmed the identity through dental records. Victor Brennan had been dead for approximately 5 months. Pancreatic cancer, advanced stage. He'd lived just long enough to see Elena and Pierce arrested, just long enough to deliver his final evidence to the police. Near his body, investigators had found a tent, supplies, and a notebook. The final entry was dated the day after Elena's arrest. It's done. Thomas and Daniel can finally rest. I can finally rest. The cancer is winning now, but I don't mind. I stayed alive for them, to make sure their killers faced justice. Now I can let go. I hope, wherever they are, they know I never stopped searching. I never gave up. And in the end, the truth came out. That's all I ever wanted. Victor Chen stood at the overlook, thinking about the Brennan family. Thomas, a good man who tried to do the right thing and died for it. Daniel, an innocent child caught in the crossfire of adult evil. Victor, who'd sacrificed his entire life to ensure they weren't forgotten. And Elena, who would spend the rest of her life in prison, haunted by the memory of the son she'd helped murder. A memorial had been erected at the site where the bodies were found. Chen approached it now, reading the simple inscription, "In memory of Thomas Brennan, 1960 to 1997, and Daniel Brennan, 1985 to 1997. Beloved father and son, the truth shall set you free." Below it, someone had added a smaller plaque. Victor Brennan, 1958 to 2024. Brother, uncle, seeker of justice. May you find peace. Chen placed a single white rose at the base of the memorial, a gesture that felt inadequate but necessary. She thought of all the cases she'd worked over the years, all the families who'd never gotten closure, who'd spent decades wondering and hoping and grieving. The Brennans had gotten their answers. Terrible as they were, the killers had been caught. Justice, however delayed, had been served. But the cost had been devastating. 3 lives lost to violence and betrayal. 1 life consumed by the pursuit of justice. Countless others touched by the ripples of evil that had spread out from one terrible decision made in 1997. As Chen walked back to her car, her phone rang. It was the victim's assistance coordinator from the DA's office. "Detective Chen, I wanted to let you know. We've established a memorial fund in Thomas and Daniel Brennan's names. It will provide scholarships for children who've lost parents to violent crime. Elena's life insurance payout and seized assets are funding it. We thought you'd want to know. Something good coming from something so terrible. It wasn't redemption, and it wasn't enough, but it was something. "Thank you," Chen said. "That's important." After hanging up, she stood beside her car for a moment, looking back at the desert landscape. Somewhere out there, Victor Brennan had spent his final days, watching the sun set over the mountains he'd walked through for nearly 3 decades, knowing he'd completed the mission that had defined his life. Chen wondered if he'd found peace at the end, if the burden he'd carried for so long had finally lifted. If, in those final moments, he'd felt his brother and nephew with him, welcoming him home. She hoped so. Because in a case filled with darkness and betrayal, with calculated cruelty and devastating loss, Victor Brennan's unwavering dedication to the truth was the one pure thing. The one light that had never wavered, never compromised, never given up. The truth shall set you free. Victor had spent 29 years proving those words true, and in the end, he'd succeeded. Chen got in her car and drove away from the memorial, from the desert, from the ghosts of a family destroyed by greed and evil. But she carried their story with her, as she always would. A reminder of why the work mattered, why seeking justice, however long it took, was never in vain. The Brennan case was closed. The killers were in prison. The victims could finally rest. And somewhere in the vast Arizona desert, Detective Sarah Chen believed, 3 brothers were finally reunited.